Hulk smashes. In this case, you, the creative operations leader, are the Hulk, and today's episode is all about smashing silos. Welcome to the Creative Ops Podcast, and thank you for joining me yet again as I continue my never ending journey of curiosity of all things creative operations. You know what I've been thinking about lately? It's what happens when you get leaders from creative operations and marketing operations together in the same room. I think what happens is you get breakthrough insights into how these two critical functions can partner together to drive better outcomes. So in this episode, I sit down with Mike Rizzo, founder of marketingops.com and a leading voice in the marketing operations field. He joins us as this podcast continues to explore the opportunities of creative operations and marketing operations working more closely together. What are we digging into today? Well, we're going to be talking about why creative ops and marketing ops are natural partners that should be collaborating much more closely. We'll then go into how integrating creative and marketing processes and technologies can enable marketing to move at the speed of ideas. We'll touch on the huge efficiency gains of templatizing and automating creative assets to empower teams across the organizations. We'll also dig into why creative operations might consider adopting more data-driven, results-oriented KPIs and how marketing operations can help with that, and what the future org structure could look like with a horizontal go-to-market operations function bringing together creative operations, marketing operations, sales operations, and more. And don't forget to tune into the companion Questions and Actions episode, where you'll walk away with actionable ideas on how to start smashing through those silos. So if you're a creative operations leader and you're ready to smash and bust some silos and explore the possibilities at the frontier of partnering with marketing operations, stay tuned into this conversation with Mike Rizzo. All right, Mike, welcome to the Creative Ops Podcast. So glad that you're able to join us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm pretty excited about this, I have to say. We've sort of riffed back and forth over the last handful of months, and I've tuned into a few of your other episodes, so I feel pretty special to be invited on.
Yeah, I've been a longtime fan of the work that you're doing in the marketing operations field. You've got a podcast as well. And I think most importantly, you started marketingops.com. It's this community of marketing operations professionals. It's like 1,300 plus marketing operations folks that are part of this community today. I've joined myself. Slack community is pretty active. You guys put out a lot of great content, including the podcast. And as you said, we started talking because I did an episode a few episodes back with Amy Tesh Strickland, and she sort of threw this dart out saying, I think creative operations should belong within the marketing operations function. And that episode got a lot of feedback from my audience, creative operations professionals. There's been quite a bit of follow-up from it. Got a lot of DMs on it. And then you and I were talking about it, and it seemed like there's a lot of like untapped opportunity and potential even before thinking about does creative operations belong in marketing operations, just those two functions better understanding each other and maybe collaborating together, a lot of low hanging fruit. But before we get to that, let me ask you, what's your definition of marketing operations? Because a lot of the creative operations people I've spoken to, one of the surprising comments I've gotten back is, I don't know what marketing operations is. And I didn't know this was a thing that existed. And I'm like, wow, massive company, wasn't aware of marketing operations.
Marketing operations, in my view, and I think a lot of us in the community share this view, is you identify what the needs are of the people inside of your organization, right? You're serving the company and the people within it, and you're identifying what are the processes that need to be in place to enable those people to be more effective and efficient in their work, all while keeping the sort of purview, the lens on how do we acquire customers in a meaningful way and measure that through technology. So how do I enable people, create a solid process, and enable them through technology? So people, process, and technology, all in that order. Your responsibility is to always start with what are the sort of needs of my audience, and how do I make sure that I think about the business's ability to go to market more effectively and more efficiently so that the customer experience, if I'm servicing the marketing team or the sales reps, et cetera, so that the customer experience on the other side is also a positive interaction with us. Because the last thing we all want, I mean, I can tell you right now, as a marketing operations professional, we get pitched a lot of software. I don't really want to be pitched cold, right? If you don't understand my pains and my needs of my business, my role, where we're at in terms of growth trajectory, all of those things play a factor into whether or not I may or may not be in market now or later for your product. I need you to be able to have a good experience, and marketing operations can help facilitate that experience for the end consumer by servicing the people, enabling a good process, and supporting it through technology.
I think what you said, correct me if I'm wrong, is the core of marketing operations is customer acquisition. And then to enable that, it's who are the people within the organization that we need that are part of enabling and responsible for customer acquisition, and how do we help support them through people, process, technology. And then also there's our customers themselves that we're looking to acquire, retain, perhaps grow in terms of revenue and things like that. And in terms of our go to market strategy, how are we creating a great user experience for them? But the core is customer acquisition.
I think one of the key challenges that, and you and I have talked a little bit about this, Nish, is tying this role, right, to some sort of revenue metric, right? And customer acquisition, inevitably you start to head down the path of, well, how much revenue are you helping us generate, right? Marketing operations isn't responsible for creating campaigns that ideating on what the message should be or who the target audience should be next, or sort of any of that traditional, what some would refer to as demand generation, right? Like they're not social media marketers, they're not paid ad specialists, they're not necessarily even strategists on what messaging and market mix should go into your A/B tests for an email campaign or a landing page, right? What they are, though, is a professional that says you want to test a hypothesis, right? Your hypothesis is that persona A is going to consume or purchase at a faster rate our product or service than persona B. Now I need to find ways to measure whether or not that is true. There's underlying tools and technology and a process that needs to be in place to be able to measure the outcome of your hypothesis. And the marketing operations team is meant to be there to help facilitate that go to market motion. I don't want someone to hear this and think that a marketing operations key performance indicator, right, to measure whether or not somebody's good at marketing operations is their ability to generate customers, because it's not. It is a pretty long line to
Right.
to the thing that I did in marketing operations, the UTM structures, the naming conventions, the organization of our data and where that appears, when it appears internally and externally to our customers or our teams. That whole ecosystem you're creating to enable go to market is a pretty far line from, oh, that's how we got that customer.
Yeah, no, that's a great clarification. And I think that word enabling is key. So you're creating the infrastructure so that you can enable what marketing or other stakeholders within the organization want to do with respect to acquiring customers, retaining customers, growing customers.
100%. And I think a lot of the messaging in the market right now is, please don't think of marketing operations as a cost center. Lots of organizations look at the marketing department as a whole as this revenue generation team that should be generating demand and leads and revenue. And marketing operations is not a cost center. It's like a critical function. You don't hire a product team and sort of measure them on their ability to generate revenue, although you could tie certain features to the ability to close new customers or what have you. Your product team is there to understand the pains of the market and assess or suss out which features and functionality need to be built into, for example, in a SaaS product, what needs to maybe come into the product to better enable their adoption, or retention or what have you. And you're not trying to measure them necessarily against their ability to generate revenue.
A lot of people in creative operations weren't aware of marketing operations. Have you been aware of this role of creative operations? And two is, what's your current understanding of what creative operations is?
I see that creative ops role as being a catalyst for delivering on what the brand's personality, voice, visual guidance, all of those brand tenants, right, that go into deploying a forward facing, customer facing, prospect facing asset into the market and ensuring that they adhere to those standards without slowing down the process too much, right? But heaven forbid a brand like Nike end up putting something out into the world that didn't go through the right sort of operational procedures to ensure that it adheres to the standards that they expect. I think that that would be a horrible outcome, right? And
Right.
I think creative operations sits in this really unique function to be able to understand the needs of the teams that want to put assets out into the market and tries to bring that to life in a way that respects the desire of the brand itself. That's sort of my initial thinking of it.
I sort of feel like creative ops is a few years behind marketing operations in terms of maturity. I also think like organizations don't exactly know what they want from creative operations. And perhaps that was a similar path that marketing ops had, or maybe is still sort of walking as well. It feels like often sort of the high level definition around creative operations is similar to what you said. It's orchestrating people, process, technology to enable the delivery of creative work, to enable great creative work to be done. So, getting rid of the friction in the process and things like that. But there's a whole lot of things beyond that surface level description that have sort of been lumped into it. Anywhere from we need to increase creative output by 2x this year because we need more content to fuel more campaigns, to, as you correctly pointed out, we need to make sure that everything we're putting out there is on brand. How do we do that? To we need to tell more impactful stories. So, how do we create more blank canvas time for the big creative minds on the team? It's really a hodgepodge of a whole bunch of things.
I would agree. I think it's further along in its maturation, perhaps, than creative ops. It has been more formally a role and a vocation for probably north of a decade ish now. I think it's getting legs under it. We've got the four pillars of marketing operations that were popularized by the Atumos group, and then the new four pillars introduced and revamped at our conference at Mopsapalooza last year that sort of just expand upon those. And we're starting to put some frameworks in place. But yeah, it is it's a hodgepodge of a lot of different responsibilities. And that's because a company's ability to go to market is a mess, right? Like there's always competing priorities. There's different KPIs that all the different teams are measured against. And how do you make sense of what is truly the North Star for the business? And marketing operations sort of sits at the crux of all of that. And to your comment earlier, or just a moment ago, about the creative ops function and what it's enabling, I think there's just so much overlap in, like, the Venn diagram. I think is very strong.
Yeah.
There's a nice healthy middle section between these two organizations, because when I think about the things that I've requested, some of the best work that I think has ever come out of my sort of multi-hat role, right? When I was more of like a demand gen growth slash marketing ops person, was trying to figure out how to operationalize the creative aspects of the machine, right? And say, I want to enable my team to build an email that is on brand, and I don't want to bog down my creative designer with a net new email design request that happens every week, right? Like, they don't have time to deal with a brand new template, design, or not even a template, a brand new design. And so then you start to think about templatizing things, and you start to think about the tenets that go into what are the aesthetics, what are the elements from a technology perspective that I need to put in place so that when my team goes to build an email or a landing page or a web page, what parts should they be able to interact with? And what flexibility could they have to be able to create that brand exposure or experience that we aspire to have in the market? And you need to partner with creative operations folks to say, okay, like, what are the sort of limits and guardrails we want to put in place? How do we want that to be reflected? And what is the tooling that I need to have to be able to enable our team to not come to either of us, right? To be able to launch this campaign. If you're in marketing ops, one of your best friends should probably be the creative person, if not the creative ops person, to try to figure out how to do enablement across the team. Because like the creative is what brings it to life, right? The storytelling that you talked about, that's what brings it all to life. And we need to be able to facilitate a faster, more efficient way to tell the story.
Should there be more of a hybrid role like go to market operations that takes like maybe it's marketing operations plus that part of creative operations that enables that scale through templatized or self-service systems. We're seeing more of this with creative ops teams where they're going, we simply cannot output the volume of requests that we're getting. Because a lot of it is, oh, this is the same thing that we did yesterday, last week, last month, last quarter. Like, I think it's a different type of creative mindset. I think of them as like scale creatives. They take their brand guidelines, current assets, previous assets, and they create these templates and self service tools from a marketing operations plus creative operations point of view. It's really that creative workflow around scale, templatizing, just sort of the things that should be quick and easy should be more aligned together in terms of like systems and processes and things like that.
You know, when I think about creative ops and the folks that I've interacted with in my career, they really truly want to enable a sales rep to have something beautiful that they can send, whether it's in a proposal or in a deck that they're customizing for their, prospect during a demo or a pitch. These creative folks want to help us put our best brand forward in every interaction. And often they're probably tied more to the marketing side, this like demand gen engine piece, but there's a whole slew of there's customer success folks and support reps and
Yeah.
sales teams and implementation folks, all of which have varying needs of some sort of creative resources. And I think that's where, the scale becomes impossible if you're just trying to create a bespoke campaign or thing every single time someone's coming to you. So that sort of begets this, okay, if I'm in creative ops and I know I'm servicing this department, right, and enabling them to create a proposal for a new prospect, I might consult them to say, okay, well, what are the 3 or 4 personas you're going to be pitching to on a regular basis? And I'm going to try to consume that information to understand what are the key visuals in our brand tenets and our brand guidelines that I need to be able to give to you for each of these maybe 3 personas that you're going to go to market against, because we probably have an opinion about that already, right? I think when we think about the systems that need to be in place to enable them, we have to sort of take that information in, understand what their requirements are on the needs, and then go work with a marketing operations professional to say, what are my options here?
We need to start thinking about them as horizontal functions and really serving the
Yes.
whole organization because like to your earlier point, whether it's sales, customer support, customer success, HR, everybody's in the job of marketing. And part of marketing, the way you take your message out in whatever form it comes in, whether it's like actually advertising a landing page, a sales proposal, whatever it might be, it includes creative as well. But that creative may need to adapt based on the audience, but it's still got to stay true to brand and the guidelines and things like that. Are you hearing that conversation in the marketing ops world that marketing ops really needs to be more horizontal? And going back to the earlier comment about like go to market operations, Is that something that's starting to bubble up more as it's marketing operations, but more? It's really about enabling the entire company.
To your question about marketing sort of being more or marketing operations, and definitely that role being more horizontal. I think creative ops 100%, creative in general is horizontal. It serves the whole business. I think we saw the industry latch on to rev ops as a category, revenue
Yes.
operations as a category in the last couple years here. It is, unfortunately, even though every single person, even the folks that recognize or like currently talk about it as sales ops 2.0, they recognize that that's not right. But for whatever reason, it still hasn't evolved past sales operations 2.0. It really is just sort of born out of sales, whether you call it rev ops or go to market ops or whatever. Where does it sit and how does it sort of touch all these branches? Because it does at the end of the day, at 100%, you know, touches it.
I've been amazed by the number of like new operations roles that have bubbled up in organizations over the last few years. We've got marketing operations, sales ops, as you said, revenue ops, creative operations, design operations, like insert function name, add operations to it. And there's a whole new role and profession around it.
Finance operations.
Finance operations. And it's because those departments are both very important and impactful. And there's more and more complexity in terms of process, technologies, and things like
Yeah.
that. But I've been equally amazed and quite frankly, sort of flabbergasted that all these operations roles aren't working together. Put aside formally working together, but even informally. Hey, you're an operations person with revenue in front of your title. I'm a marketing operations person. They're a creative operations person. Maybe we should get together and have a coffee once a month and just sort of compare notes in terms of what are you guys doing over there? What are your processes? What are the technologies that you're using? What do you think about updating? Is that just me or has that been your experience as well? And if it has been, do you think we're just sort of early to this and that's about to happen with folks go to market partners out there trying to push for this idea? And are we about to see maybe the chief operating officer has this go to market operations function under them?
I do see just a general lack of communication, I think, across the varying operational roles. I think if they do get together, I imagine the first, two coffee meetups are just going to be a bitch fest where you get to
Right.
you get to just
Yeah.
complain about the problems that you have.
Yeah.
Because I think that's one of the things that you can easily like commiserate on, right? Just identifying like how hard it can be to fulfill on requests of all kinds, right? To answer the question about are we going to see a shift, I think we will. I have talked to a number of folks. Melissa McCready comes to mind. I think she's still the acting president of a nonprofit that was once known as MOCA, which stood for the Marketing Operations Cross Country Alliance, if I remember correctly. It
Okay.
is now the Growth Operations Community. And so that falls in line with what we're talking about here, right? Growth operations in her mind is more customer centric. It's very much more in line with this idea of go to market operations, right? But growth, revenue operations services the business. It's a little bit self serving. You're thinking about revenue and you can generate revenue in lots of different ways, but you can create a lot of unhappy customers along the way.
Yeah.
But if you think about growth and you focus on what does growth look like for our customer, what does growth look like for us, perhaps that's a more positive outcome. And so that was a really interesting take. She actually was like positing that the COO is due for a shakeup. I very much agree. I think that role is due for a shakeup because I think from a traditional perspective, the COO has come from, manufacturing, right? Like physical products, the manufacturing line, understanding sort of the motions of the business. Biz ops was put under them eventually. But in a world of tech, your COO has a very different sort of purview of responsibility. And I think it is possible that the COO could be the right sort of leader for these operational groups. It just sort of depends on how things shake out. What I gleaned from the conversation so far, and what I maybe have seen a little bit of in my career, is these CFOs are tired of feeling like they're the naysayers that just axe, tools and people and all this other stuff in the name of profitability or whatever it is that they're going after. I think they truly want to understand what are the underpinnings and the needs of this business, which sounds a lot like a COO's responsibility.
I agree with
Yeah.
you. I think I mean, we've seen the CMO role change quite a bit over the last decade or so. I think that's starting to come to the other C-suite roles. And I think just in general, org charts are going to look dramatically different over the next 3 to 5 years because of some of the things you've been talking about. I think AI is going to have a massive impact on it. We're going to need things like data to be more like flowing across organizations. Today, it sort of feels like every functional unit has their own island of data, and that's untapped potential and opportunity for the organization as a whole. I want to give the audience like some concrete things they can do. This sort of started with, does creative operations belong in marketing operations? I think the answer is it depends on the organization. Most other answers, it depends on putting together a decision tree to help folks maybe sort of work through that self assessment for themselves. But we are just talking about all these operations roles. So let's say somebody's listening and they go, "Hey, you know what? There is Susan over in marketing operations and Tom over in revenue operations and these other operations role. So if that listener starts to organize a monthly call, maybe the first one, as you said, it's really just sort of a venting session where, like, oh my God, I can't get anyone to follow the process.
Yeah.
But then, coffee chat number 2, 3, 4, 5. What are some of the things that these operations people, when they get together, should be talking about? That there might be some value that eventually comes out of that. That's both self serving and helpful for the collective of operations people and functions.
I think first and foremost, it's understanding or just getting ideas from whether they're net new ideas that you create collectively or you learn from the teams that you're now interacting with around how are you understanding the needs of the business, right? Hey, Tom and RevOps, what is your understanding of the needs of our business to be able to generate new customers or what have you? And then how are you staying on top of the needs of your team that you're interacting with on a regular basis to be able to facilitate those go to market motions? You might learn that they sit in on QBRs or they host quarterly business reviews themselves, that they're analyzing certain data points. You might learn that there's a desire to be able to do that and they don't have the data yet, and you might quickly get into a conversation then on, well, what are the data points that we collectively need to be communicating on? Almost like a data dictionary to that degree, right? And so maybe one really actionable thing is let's identify the top 100 data points that we think actually matter to our business as a whole, regardless of the teams. Like, what are the top 100 sort of signals that we need to pay attention to? And then use that as a foundation for, okay, does that actually matter to sales? Does that matter to creative ops? How could creative ops influence these metrics in any way? I think that's a nice jumping off point, is to just understand what is your understanding of the business's needs to be able to enter new markets or sell to customers, and what data do you rely upon to be able to like have conversations with your teams and around that subject, right?
I really like that. And then I guess in the ongoing coffee chats, they can start to share like their respective processes and maybe find some low hanging fruit for, oh, if we could probably connect what we're doing over here in creative operations with what you're doing over there in marketing operations, or if we made this little change, it helps both of us, where 1 + 1 = 3. And I'm amazed that there isn't more collaboration between marketing ops and creative ops. It's just sort of a default because creative operations is tasked with deliver the creative output, you know, in the quantity we need, at the speed at which we need it, as cost efficiently as possible. And it's going to be consumed by the marketing campaigns, which marketing operations enables their execution. There's just got to be so much low hanging fruit there. So I'd say share respective processes, talk about your tech stacks, like do a show and tell. Here's technologies we're using. And I think with an eye towards being able to operate in a more integrated, efficient way across the organization, be open and transparent and communicate about here's technologies we use that really serve us well. Here's technologies that we're probably thinking about dumping. If you're thinking about getting a new tool for problem X, then talk to each other about it. Maybe there's, again, something you can partner on that you can make budgets stretch further and get more of what you want. And again, create points of integration so that process is integrated and data is flowing across those different functions.
Two things that come to mind when I think about this like heavy overlap. Let's set aside revenue operations for a second and let's just call it sales ops. And maybe there's sales ops and marketing ops and creative ops. There's two pretty solid examples of technologies, and I'll sort of just talk about them more broadly rather than naming a specific tool. Right. The first one is like quotes. Right. You're generating like proposals and quotes and bids. There's lots of tools out there for you to be able to do that. And inside of these tools, there are things that sort of need to be paid attention to from a data perspective, right? So you've got sales teams that need to be able to usher along a deal because once the quote is sent, maybe the opportunity changes statuses. That information needs to transfer back over to the marketing team for them to understand that they've done a good job sending over, hopefully, a marketing lead that was, qualified enough to move along in the stages. Perhaps some of the underlying data that we've already captured about their interactions with that potential customer is actually stored on their record, and it's actually brought in to the conversation, right? And this is a MarTech thing, right? Marketing operations says, cool, I understand you want to be able to close deals more effectively when you send out your first proposal. Well, we're going to take this tool, summarize the conversation with these new AI capabilities, store that as a data property. And when you go to submit that proposal, we're actually going to list that information. We're going to enable you to do that through a piece of technology, send it over to the customer, and they see that we heard them. We heard them so clearly from our recording of our webinar or whatever, a recording of our demo, that it's right there. There's the action items that we called out to them, right? There's two teams coming together right away that say, okay, I understand your needs. I understand potentially how to take the data and put that out into the market. And then along the way, the sales rep is saying, well, guess what? Maybe I'm interacting with totally different markets, right? And I need the ability to have that visual change when I'm selling to Germany versus Canada versus the US, right? Because that background graphic, the color scheme, something might be offensive in it if I got the wrong people on there or what have you. So I better interact with a creative ops person to be able to have the resources in place to know that that's a thing that I have to adjust to. And the creative ops person is going to say, well, how do I make sure that that gets into that proposal? That's one piece of technology that just brought three people together to try to help close a deal. And then the other piece of technology, and I don't have to illustrate the example beyond it, but I think digital asset management just instantly like crosses all three of those, right? So yeah, that brings these people together.
I love both of those examples. And in the first one, it could be like if you're working on a proposal and let's say it's got a seven-figure dollar amount tied to it, right? You might pull in the human on the creative operations and creative team to say, okay, like let's make sure we're taking into account all those factors to have our brand come through this in a way that'll be relevant to that customer based on any number of things, where they're located, their industry, whatever else. Or we're churning out a lot of proposals, but we still want to have the benefit of doing that. So, how can creative operations, marketing ops work together to build a self service system so that quote or proposal generator is taking that into account? And the rep doesn't even have to sort of think about it, right? It's consuming CRM data to go, oh, prospect is located in Denmark, they're in the manufacturing industry, therefore a set of images and other creative assets and templates are presented to that sales rep, and they could just go on their merry way and put together the proposal. They don't even realize they're making it both brand relevant as well as prospect relevant to them.
There's no reason that the sales rep even necessarily has to go, oh, okay, like let me think critically for a second. I'm selling to somebody in this territory, therefore I need to pick template Z versus template A. You could probably find solutions that just sort of does that, right? Like it recognizes the data of who it is that I'm about to interact with, and it makes that experience that much easier. And the rep can focus on who needs to get the message, follow ups, what message needs to go in there, all the specific details that they already know about that particular interaction.
Yeah, I love those examples that you gave. So just two more quick questions, but I'm almost thinking now I want to put together those question card packs that you have for couples or families and things like that. I almost want to
Yeah.
put that together for these operations people to get together and ask each other questions and sort of break the ice and things like that. But coffee chats, folks, look up the operations people and go and start having coffees with them because I think there's a lot of low hanging value in terms of learning from each other and then doing together. And then I just like to talk about, for the most part, creative operations leaders and teams are sort of perceived as like a tactical role in organizations. I think it could be a lot more strategic. And I get the sense marketing operations has walked down that path, perhaps still is. And anything you've learned from having walked down that path yourself that might be valuable for the listeners.
So I will say marketing operations is still fighting for the quote unquote strategic seat at the table. I don't want to say that we've figured it out by any stretch. There's still a lot of sort of order taker, task doer mentality in organizations. And unfortunately, that does actually slow your business down in their ability to generate revenue and go to market more quickly and efficiently and all of these things. The sooner you can bring in the folks that understand the art of the possible when it comes to these needs of the business, the sooner they can tell you whether or not it's actually possible inside of the current landscape that you have. I would not pretend to be able to properly understand the magnitude or effort level that goes into building a particular feature set in a SaaS product if I didn't have somebody in engineering by my side that could say, hey, architecturally, we are not set up to even interact with that data right now. And I think folks need to start to realize that these are the people that understand how these systems work. And so if you want to enter a new market or communicate to somebody, you should probably have them in the conversation sooner. Marketing operations in particular has visibility into a lot of the data and the tools that are in place across the organization. And if you in creative operations have visibility into key bits of information, like look at something with the hat of curiosity, right? And try to understand, well, what do I have access to today? Ask the question, do these deliverables that we're producing make a difference in any way? Is
Yeah.
there some sort of testing that's happening? Do they want to do testing if there isn't any, right? And I think if you start to ask questions back, yeah, you're going to ask for more work, but you'll be seen as someone potentially that's not just trying to be an order taker, right? And a task execution person, but somebody that's trying to understand the needs of the business and potentially make an impact on it. I think Nish, when you and I talked, we talked a little bit about there's this unique thing around creative ops that you could totally own the reporting and analytics around the visual brand that resonates most with different audiences. That
Yeah.
feels like a marketing person's job, but if there's other hypotheses that you want to come up with where you're like, hey, our brand palette and guidelines allow us to have this differing layers of visual identity, like I want to be in charge of understanding which of these visual identities and aesthetics make an impact on conversion rates or whatever it is. I think you have an opportunity to work with your marketing ops team to understand and analyze that data.
That's a great recommendation, and I've long been advocating for, really screaming for, like, go and grab data, use the data, better understand what's going on so that you could be, to use your terminology, you move from order taking to actually being a partner. Let's try these things. Oh, this works better. I've even suggested to creative ops people look at in market performance data so that when you get requests and somebody in marketing is saying, I want these videos for this audience, put yourself in a position where you can question it and go, yeah, but email works better with that audience. Why are we
Mhm.
doing video? Is it because you've got a personal preference for it? Or like, what are we actually trying to achieve here? Even if that's not necessarily your job, understand how these things are performing. Because I would like to see creative operations adopt more marketing KPIs as part of what they're holding themselves to, even though revenue is not their direct responsibility. Ultimately, their survival and ability to grow and thrive in the organization is going to be a function of revenue. So they should at least be aware of what's working, what's not working, and be a more thoughtful partner versus just like taking those orders.
I think about my friend that used to be director of demand gen at a company, a SaaS company we worked for, and he operated as best as he could. You know, we were a small, scrappy team, startup, typical situation, and he would use one of the landing page builder tools to go build out all kinds of different variants, right, and try to understand which was converting better. It would be great for him to have a partner that said, "Here, why don't you try these other assets rather than sort of coming up with it yourself, like work with somebody to say, hey, what could I test here? I really want to put a visual here versus over here, you know, and I want these visuals to maybe change depending on what it is that I'm interacting with. Like what am I allowed to sort of experiment with? And then you as this creative ops person could facilitate that engagement, letting this individual have resources to rely upon. And then you could be their partner to say, well, which one worked? And hopefully that director of demand gen is thinking about the next test that they want to do, and they know they've got a partner on the other side that remembers or is at least paying attention to some of that stuff, because doing this in a vacuum really sucks. Right?
It does.
Like
Yeah.
oh man, what was that one like visual I used that seemed to get the most like results? Like imagine if the creative ops person already knew that
Yeah.
information, right? That's
Yeah.
super super cool.
And that's
So
how you get permission to move from tactical to strategic in
yeah,
terms of perception and role. So, just
yeah.
quickly wrapping up here, because I know we've kept you over your budgeted time, which I appreciate.
Yeah.
What were those four pillars you mentioned earlier in the conversation?
I want to pay credence to the original four pillars because they established a very important baseline for marketing operations as a vocation. So the original four were platform operations, campaign operations, marketing intelligence operations, MyOps is what they would abbreviate that to, and then marketing development and engineering. The new sort of iteration that was worked on by a number of individuals in the community, particularly in those that are in thought leadership for sure. And you could think of these, just before I finish, you could think of these pillars almost as roles, departments, responsibilities within a team. And as you go to build out your marketing ops team or creative ops team, maybe you could adapt some of these
Yep.
to some of those needs. But technology and data management is the first pillar. The second is strategy operations, or strat ops for short. The third is enablement and PMO. And you'll see sort of the old four pillars getting rolled into some of these broader groups. So campaign operations, for example, sits inside of enablement and PMO. And then the fourth is this marketing, business intelligence, and insights pillar, and really trying to put some boundaries around, well, how can marketing operations take the elements that are in these pillars to help drive strategy and growth in a business.
I'll link to that in the show notes. And maybe that does provide a starting point for creative operations folks to start to think about what should those pillars be for creative ops, because there aren't today. I think the definition is people, process, technology, but we need to move beyond that. And I imagine within those four pillars, there either is or there will be levels of it, beginner, intermediate, advanced, to sort of give some idea as to where are we with each one of these within our organization, or even as an individual, where am I? Because I'm thinking about career pathing, or I lead that marketing operations function and I want to go to my manager and ask for budget and say, here's where we are today around these four key pillars. Here's where we want to be next year so that we can enable X, Y, and Z for the business. Here's the investment that we need, either in training, technology, additional headcount, whatever that might be. So that's incredibly valuable. All right, final question. Who would you like to hear from on a future episode of Creative Ops? And I'll ask you to maybe be specific to somebody else that might be able to add to this discussion that we've started today around marketing ops times creative ops, maybe times the other operations roles as well.
I think from a practitioner role perspective, I would like to hear from some CMOs around either senior leaders that are taking on RevOps or CMOs that have revenue and marketing operations departments either reporting into them or at least within the organizational structure to understand how are you interacting with your creative ops teams and these other operational roles.
I love that suggestion, and maybe that'll be a good way to further encourage more of those coffee chats between marketing ops, creative ops, and the other ops folks, is getting CMOs more aware of like this opportunity for these different operations leaders to be at least communicating with each other and then hopefully collaborating with each other.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Well, Mike, thanks so much for doing this with me today. I think this is a good kickoff to a topic that we're going to keep exploring because I think there's a ton of untapped value here and a ton of opportunity for creative operations people to work with like-minded folks, at least in marketing operations and likely in other ops roles across your organization.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. And I hope we can bring more of us ops people together. But yeah, this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you having me on and looking forward to more on this in the future.
All right. Thanks so much, Mike. That's a wrap for today's episode. Remember to please do three things. Number one, head over to creativeops.fm and sign up for that companion newsletter. Number two, whatever your favorite podcast player is, please hit subscribe. Search for Creative Ops, all one word, Creative Ops Podcast. Make sure you don't miss the next episode. And remember, number three, this isn't just my journey of curiosity. This is our journey of curiosity about all things creative ops. So if you've got a question or maybe a different perspective about what you heard today, or maybe you just want to share something that you're curious about, drop me a line at nish@creativeops.fm. Thanks so much, and I look forward to catching you at the Creative Ops Water Cooler for next week's episode.